No, I just,
You ready?
I'm ready.
Give me 2 seconds.
One.
Yeah.
Okay, if we're ready, we'll start the finance meeting Tuesday, September 12th.
Chairwoman Kennedy Anthony is absent. Vice Chairman James Taylor.
Here.
Councilor Sue Engelbach here. Councilor Miguel Sanchez. Here. We have 3 present, 1 absent. We have a quorum.
Okay, before we start, I'd like to recognize Councilman Vargas is here, Oscar Vargas, President Pro Tem Juan Machado, Councilwoman Joe Peterson, Senior Deputy Majority Leader John Gonzalez. Who else is there? Any other council people? None? Okay. If you could read number 1 into the record, please.
Item number 1, resolution authorizing approval of the following contract award by the Board of Contract and Supply in accordance with section 21-26B1 of the Code of Ordinances, Manafort Brothers Incorporated, Department of Planning and Development, $10,263,463.
Anybody here to represent them? Where it?
Raise your right hand. You swear from the county attorney that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Please state your name and title of the record.
My name is Jess Lance. I'm Jess Lance, Director of Special Projects for the Department of Planning and Development.
Any, want to explain this, and then we'll have any questions from anyone else for that.
Sure. So this contract is for the construction of the Muskatucket River Freeway. This has been a 5 to 6 year project that we've been working very closely with the Muskatucket River Watershed Council on, as well as RIDA, as this is mostly funded through the State Transportation Improvement Program. We have additional grant funding and city CIP funding set aside for the construction of this project. We have done extensive community engagement with abutters throughout the neighborhood, and we have been in constant communication with council members in the area. We are planning to do some community outreach to inform area residents of the construction schedule as long as the construction contract gets awarded.
Any questions from finance members?
Can you just explain where exactly the most ships were exactly?
Sure. So this project spans Kingsley Avenue and Promenade from Eagle Street to Providence Place Mall, constructing a shared use path along the roadway, along the river, with green infrastructure, pocket parks, kayak launches, and other amenities for residents around the area.
Any other questions from us? Any members? Oscar?
Kingsley Way, less than $300,000 with a year and a half ago.
No, it's always been upwards of a couple of $1 million. We've seen significant price increases with inflation and everything. we've been able to get this constructed years ago, or a bit lower, but, given inflation, price increases, labor, we've seen significant increases years.
From half a million went to 10 million.
I'm sorry,
From half a million went to 10 million.
it was always at least $2 million, but with, like I said, the current construction estimates of materials, it's gone up. And that's
It's still the same plans, like I saw when I first came.
correct,
The bridge, make the Tuesday as a one way
correct.
coming up.
That's correct.
Any other questions? Council members, any other questions?
Jess, can you just elaborate a little bit on the relationship between the city and the watershed division?
The partnership between the city and the watershed council has been going on for long before I started here about 6 years ago. We have worked with them on various sections of the Nebraska-Tucket Greenway, out from the Johnston line all the way in. We've helped with managing grants and other construction contracts to sort of fill gaps in the off-road sections of the Greenway. And this has been probably at least a 20-year effort of the watershed council themselves to see this project come to fruition. So we're here.
That's important.
Just quickly reviewing this, proposal, has already gone through the bidding process, correct? And I see that there is no minority participation except one. Is there an explanation why this process, there was no participation?
So technically, by the city's MDE requirements, it technically doesn't meet that, but we have worked extensively with the legal department and with RIDOT, who are the main funders. There is an exceptional amount of federal funding that is supporting this project. And as a result of that, the requirements from the Federal Highway Administration require a disadvantaged business enterprise requirement of at least 10%. And we have met that. The requirements are different for contractors between the MDEW program and the CDE program. And all of the subcontractors that Interport has provided are certified on the state's clean.
What percentage is that?
The 10% of the.
Okay. And who monitors that?
So that will be monitored through our partners at the state DOT.
One, I'm really excited about this, and this is my work that I've worked on and from that for a number of years, and it was going to be a really great improvement and something we're more fresh for years, we spent a lot of time kind of on things. And it's such a shame that we have to take advantage of this in there, and that people don't have access, you see it, and you just like can't add to it, I work at the office building for a while, it's just like it's such a shame to put in there. But I have a very minor question beyond my excitement. This is a state road, or Kingsley and Providence, both state roads, or some of these cities?
So these are all city roads. Yeah, yeah. All of this is city-owned roadway.
And the funding comes from right.
The funding comes from RIDOT through the state transportation. Yeah, so we try to work very closely with them through vetting, design.
And through like the sketch process.
Thank you. Last question. Who's in charge of the river to maintain the river and fix it?
The river itself. That would be the Army Corps of Engineers, I believe, in this area. I also, there's some jurisdiction overlap between TEM, CRMC, and the Army Corps of Engineers.
Because like, I would say that we haven't had a chance to enjoy the river, but the river enjoyed us yesterday. He overflowed and flowed the whole part of the street. is because nobody's maintaining the river. And they're not doing the right construction that when something happens to avoid the river or want to properly owners and damage the whole.
Yeah.
That's something that we have to do that. And these new projects coming up, like to raise more water on top of it, to the water not to overflow.
So part of this project, like I said, includes green infrastructure like bioswales and new street trees along the length of the project that will help with that stormwater runoff. So water will be filtering in to those areas. We're capturing, I would say we're capturing somewhere around like 50 or 60% of the water, something like that. It's I don't remember off the top of my head what the TEM requirements were for that, but we're meeting the requirements of TEM, and we're giving back some more space in order to handle some of the water so that we will hopefully see reduced flooding in that area.
We might have to make a bigger bridge.
We can look at that. The limits of this project don't go all the way to Valley Street, but we'll be looking at that in the future.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, a motion. Number one.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much for your testimony. City Clerk, can you read number 2, please? Wentworth.
Item number 2, communication from His Honor the Mayor dated September 1st, 2023, submitting the tentative memorandum of agreement between the City of Providence, Rhode Island, and Brown University for a period of 10 years commencing in 2024 and ending in 2034. Item number 3, communication from His Honor the Mayor dated September 1st, 2023, submitting the tentative memorandum of understanding between the City of Providence, Rhode Island, and Brown University, Providence College, Johnson & Wales University, and Rhode Island School of Design for a period of 20 years commencing in 2023 and ending 2043. The following has been invited to give a presentation: Courtney Hawkins, Chief Operating Officer; Lawrence Mancini, Chief Financial Officer; and Jeff Dana, City Solicitor.
Please raise your right hand. You swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, but the truth is what we got. Please state your full name and title for the.
Jeffrey Davis, City Solicitor.
Chief Operating Officer.
City Chief.
Thank you.
Okay, if I could just remind everybody that the green button, push the button to block this. Some people are saying they can't hear us, I'm saying they're watching this. So, people watching, how was watching. So, if you could tell us, Elaine, about this.
Yeah, so it's okay if you share every presentation that was going to run through, and then we're available for questions. We also have our colleagues from the solutions here.
Sure, that's fine. Obviously, we're passing something around, but we want to all this included one. All this included one. We have this as included one. Favor? Opposed, okay, this is included one. What an excellent exhibit one.
Thank you. So I want to start by thanking you all for having us here tonight, and for the time that many of you have spent with us already, trying to understand what I acknowledge is a complicated set of agreements. Many of you have been briefed at maybe ad nauseam already, so I'm going to go through this quickly so we can have as much time as possible for questions. Just to start for framing, when we entered these negotiations with our colleagues at the four institutions, we had 3 primary goals. One was to ensure that the institutions would be providing significant more financial support to the city over the term of the agreements. Two was to really set a model for what pilots with institutions of higher education could look like in cities across the country. And three was to, respect and understand the economic and, both the economic challenges and the priorities of our institutional partners. We believe that these institutions are a vital part of the city's economy. And so while we wanted to develop agreements that brought financial resources to the city, we also approached the negotiation with respect for the importance of these institutions. So as a reminder, and as the clerk noted on the agenda, there are two agreements before you tonight. One we call the MOU. That's the voluntary 20-year agreement between the city and the 4 institutions together. The other is, and I'm going to talk more about what's in each of these later on. The second is the MOA. That's a separate agreement between the city and Brown that provides an additional $46 million over a 10-year period. So the next slide, entitled Total Value Over 20 Years, just gives you a framework for how we look at the all-encompassing value of these two agreements and how we compare them to previous agreements. So as a reminder, the city has had 2 previous pilot agreements with institutions, the 2003 agreement and the 2012 agreement. When we combine the voluntary payments, so just cash payment from the institutions to the city, combining those 2 previous agreements against the agreements before you today, the institutions have voluntarily agreed to provide more than double the amount of cash payment to the city over the 20-year period. The table below that shows some of the additional benefits to the city that are included in these agreements. So in addition to the voluntary payments under the MOU and MOA column, there is agreement around community contributions that the institutions will make towards the city that are, potentially non-cash in value, but bring other kinds of values to the city. There's an acknowledgement that these institutions now, by state statute, are required to pay commercial taxes for any property that they're using for commercial use. And there's an agreement with the institutions to phase out the parcels that are currently part of the transition parcel, I like to call program, that existed in the previous agreement. Just a minute on that because there have been questions. In the previous MOU, there was a call to phase out the taxes on a property when an institution that was exempt took a property off the tax rolls. The taxes would phase out over a period of 15 years. When our 2003 agreement expired, the obligation from the institutions to continue to phase those payments out actually expired with that agreement. And so as part of this negotiation, we asked the institutions to honor their commitment or to maybe recommit to phasing out the taxes for those properties fully over a 15-year period, which provides an additional $3.4 million to the city. I'll note that that was budgeted for this year because I think it wasn't fully contemplated with those transition payments ended. And so this will ensure that we have the roughly $875,000 that is budgeted in this year's budget. The next slide just breaks down the voluntary payments between the MOA and the MOU. And again, as a reminder, the MOA payments are only from Brown. The MOU are combined payment across the 4 institutions. You'll note that this year the agreements will provide $7 million in payments to the city. That is roughly the placeholder that we have in our current budget. But the placeholder also includes payments from other institutions that have pilots with the city. So with the $7 million payment, we'll actually have more than we needed to fill that gap, which will allow the city to increase currently. The MOA kicks in next year, and so when we go into the budget year for next year, we will be expecting $13.1 million. Okay. So a few notes on the MOU. So as a reminder that the MOU is broken into 2, big
contribution components, one, the voluntary payments, and the second are the community contributions. Community contributions are generally non-cash payments made by the four institutions to improve our community. All the institutions agree to targets for those payments that mirror their voluntary payment, and agree to a transparent reporting process with the city where they would report on what they are accounting for as their community contributions. And it's this administration's intention to produce a public report every year that documents those contributions to the community. As it relates, I also, as it relates to the community contributions, want to point out that the agreement doesn't limit the contributions to the list that's included in the MOU. Those are suggestions, but sure, the institutions have the opportunity to work with us to develop other ways that they might positively contribute to the community, and would account for that in their annual report. As it relates to the voluntary payments, another note that due to an ask and from the council, the institutions agreed to increase the rate of escalation of their payments. So the kind of original draft contemplated a 2% increase a year. The council president sought to ask the institutions to consider escalating that rate of increase over time. And so you'll note that, you know, in each 5-year period, the rate of escalation increases, so that in the last 5 years, we agreed that the payment actually increases by 3% every year. The previous MOU from 2003 only increased at a rate of 1.5%. In the final 5 years, that rate will go. As it relates to the MOA, those are payments from Brown, $46 million over 10 years. As part of those, the city agrees to support some key priorities for Brown. Important to note that where those priorities need to go through another formal process, most notably the city plan commission process, they will go through that. The administration doesn't have the ability to guarantee any outcome from that process. We're simply indicating that we will support the institution's application as part of it. There's also a change to the police substation, which is wholly in control of the administration, and we intend to move that substation, but keep it on the side. And my last note on the MOA, there is some ability for Brown to reduce their payments made to the city by doing some things that we really wanted to do to incentivize Brown to deliver more value to the city. And this was, you know, I give the mayor and President Paxton a lot of credit. They kind of came into these negotiations wanting to align their interests between Brown and the city, and the goal of these 3 credit opportunities is to do that. So the first is where Brown substantially participates in the development of a building. The example we have been using, because it is often, you know, top of my purpose, is the CIC building, where they signed on as an anchor tenant to help that building be developed. And new commercial tax revenue is added to the city's tax roll. That Brown gets a 50-cent credit for every dollar of new taxes that's added. So in that circumstance, we're going to get $1 commercial tax, and we're still going to get 50 cents from Brown for their payment. So ultimately, we're getting $1.50 instead of that. The second tax that works the same way is when Brown returns currently exempt property to the commercial tax roll. Again, they would get a 50-cent credit for every dollar returned, so the city ultimately would benefit $1.50 on our tax rolls in total in that year. And then the final is just a note that the university is giving the city the ability to draw down on the $46 million at a point in time for a project that is a priority for the city. It could be workforce housing, child care centers, a number of things, or we could be provided a no interest loan or no interest payment from Brown, and they would deduct that from future payments for us. That's at the city's discretion, and there's no obligation for us to do that. So with that, I will pause also referred by my colleagues for questions, and then we can look back when you're ready to prepare for these discussions.
Any questions from finance members?
I have a lot of questions. That's all right. I'm just gonna jump right in. So one, thank you so much for the presentation and for the PowerPoint. It's helpful to go through it. I do have a number of questions. I'll take it right now. But my first question, then we'll go. My first question is about something you said at the end, the police substation. When I was briefed on this, I was told we were planning to move it somewhere else on the east side. But there are no current plans or it's really important to have a substation, but I also recognize that the substation is in terrible condition. There are officers who are working with something. Yeah. I don't have a further update for you with that, and I actually want to have a conversation with you or the other counselors about that. It's my understanding that that spot was always meant to be temporary, and so I think it should be our priority to move it, and as part of this agreement, we'll be obligated to do that, and we'll work with that. That's the it's like how can we have some sort of like promise under oath. I mean, both the mayor and I have publicly committed. He has no intention of moving that substation on. I asked Jeff Dana to put it in space. So we're going to. We can get a better. I'm committed to working with you. I'll figure out.
Would it be easier for everyone if we all spoke of the MOU first and then the MOA, or if that's comfortable going back and forth?
Okay. I guess I have a few additional questions. So if for the MOA, just to say what from the MOA reads to me more like a purchase and sale agreement, like if it's they're purchasing the city of Providence and less like a permit, which I think is a standard thing, but so words for that. It does just feel like a sale and not like a volunteer. So one, I'm wondering why it's kind of part of this conversation, but to that point, if the funding for that starts to come in fiscal year 25, when do they get possession of?
So yes, I think an appropriate way to look at the MOA is as a transactional document. The MOU is and the payments to the city, there are conditions precedents to the payments being made. And so those conditions precedent are predominant. But chief operating officer processes that have to be followed by for to take over certain pieces of these streets for rights over city street. So those things will have to go through the same process that anyone else would have to go through. And what have you. And the city won't receive payments if those conditions.
If I could just add, the previous MOU had transactions as part of it.
Yeah.
So it's not unprecedented in type of arrangement, that there are agreements to support the priorities of the institution.
Yeah, it's consistent with the previous agreement with Brown. And part of this MOA is an extension parking piece.
The value of the parking that we previously given in the Brown, how that may change. It strikes me that they own a lot of city streets where they could revenue sell at a pretty high rate to their, to employees, to get to use that parking, like, the cost to use that parking. Is quite high. So that's lost revenue to us and revenue for that. So it's wondering if we've updated, like, what is the actual monetary value of this, and is it equal to a budget of $46 million? And are we still, I guess the answer to that question is, and maybe this is part of the CPC process, but like, how much obligation will we still have to those roads, into like cloud and policing, and like also.
So the previous MOA with respect to the parking piece, was a 20-year agreement with 2 10-year extensions and functions. And so this is extending that. And mechanics of it, Brown is responsible for all the maintenance of those lots. And Brown is responsible for creating whatever permitting process and its employees and keeps whatever revenue it receives from its employees. Brown can't, some of the parking has time periods during which it's exclusive to Brown, other time periods that it's open to the public. And Brown cannot recoup any revenue for parking by the public during those periods. And the city enforces the parking, and any revenue that is recovered through enforcement is kept by the city. So this keeps in place that exact same mechanism that existed.
We haven't really updated like what that value would be if we instead kept those parking spots ourselves and.
Not related to parking, we do understand the assessments for the street.
Others, also on the MOA, if we can draw down on the MOA and get like, is there a risk that then we end up installing the program to like we ask for 10 million, we think we have some sort of like thing, and then they've been able to like chip down the way at how much they go. It's like 30% reduction. We are in a case of
I don't think we would have to get comfortable enough to be agreeing with that. That's what like kind of just the administration, we asked them to do it, so.
Why did this agreement not include like future, like phase up program or something? Like, why did we end that program? Like, in the theoretical example where like Frisbee, I don't know if it's Browns. Or Frisbee, it's probably not, but Frisbee wise, I don't know, the crowd's baseball, which obviously is an example, like, that's immediately off the tax rolls instead of like ratcheting down. Why would we not want to do that?
So in a negotiation, like things, you have to make decisions about what is most important. What these agreements provide is guaranteed consistent funding over time. If you look at the transition parcel payment, like the value of properties that have come on the transition parcel, gone through the transition parcel process since 2020, it's only been $150,000 in taxes. So like we're actually, from my perspective, set up to have more consistent predicted amount of money than we would in that. And so it's, it's a matter of what's most important. And getting the commitment to phase out all of them in addition to what we're getting. I think it's, a good.
I guess the question that I have myself and that I want to share with the council person later today is the commitment to quality of life concerns. Like, how do we ensure one that it actually happens with two? Who's in charge of that? Because it gets down to like the dollar. Like, who's in charge of monetizing those contributions? You can kind of like, and who, like, what independent body, I guess, is going to like monetize what was going on? is it's a good excuse to do exactly what we're doing now and just kind of like monitor that. Like the example I saw, which I love, is very supportive of, the example I saw on the news is, you know, the procurement of local development. That's great. That's provided good value for the state of Rhode Island. That's also a way that Brown advertises itself, it's very good to advertises itself. Like,
I don't think buying local.
oh, okay, that was one that was in like the project or something. So,
I think purchasing from local businesses
Yeah.
is an economic contribution that these institutions make to the city.
Yeah.
That is not contemplated as economic contribution. An example of a community contribution is, you know, Brown redid a STEM classroom in a local elementary school.
Yeah.
So the value of that would be great. I would want to be honest, but I don't think this is something where we're going to be hiring an external auditor to audit community contributions. The city of Boston does this quite robustly. I don't think they do that. But I hope that the transparency that we're providing associated with it brings, you know, some amount of daylight, brings, you know, honesty and integrity to a process, because it's going to have to stand the test of people looking at it and saying, I don't think this is right, you know, and holding each other accountable. So, whereas the credits in the MOA, there is a provision for an outside auditor because there's like a direct monetary credit to that. But the community contributions will be a joint effort that is funded.
Just quickly, I want to recognize Councilman President Royce, and we also have State Representative Enrique Sanchez. Councilman. I just want to make a quick comment, Joe. So Monday night we have Manning cast. If it's watching football tonight, we got Sanchez. Yes. So what we're going to do is sort of clarify, when people raise their hand. We're going to do the finance first, all their questions, and then I'll pass it on to the.
Sure. My first question, I'll just go back. What is the thought process around the 20-year agreement? One of my stronger values is leaving our position, city in a much better place and whoever comes after us. And I plan on being nowhere near this building in 20 years. So what is the thought process to tie, essentially, in my perception, tie the hands of the future administrations, councils from, this is specifically to the MOU, MOA is a 10-year. So me personally, I would like to see the MOU be a 10-year agreement as well. But can you guys just explain a little bit what thought process is in signing the 20-year agreement?
I'll say my view, but where it's to be waiting also. I mean, I think it's exactly right. It's trying to set up future administrations with guaranteed funding at an escalation rate that is competitive, so that, you know, future budgets don't have to have the kind of uncertainty that we always come into this. So I think the value that we're delivering with these agreements warrants the contemplation of something that's that long.
Trying that opinion, but span 20 years. City will see another change. See what 92% of the city budget is already for. Those critical expenditures on wages and service pension contributions. The next 10, 15 years, those things significant. How do you offset that? 10. One that additional revenue for the ground. People in the state of the average is 10 million. That's significant. Impact to the city budget. How we had that opportunity to negotiate in terms of conditions to see fair and favorable. To get that out of the
So you just kind of follow up on that, like why wouldn't we let a legislative body or administration do it at 10 years at that point?
You're assuming that they would be able to negotiate more. Right? I mean,
So I think getting an agreement that escalates the rate of payment will kind of competitive rate over time, sets up future administrations to not be faced with the uncertainty of what they do or not. It also provides, external entities that look at the city with a surety that this money will be in place, some predictability like Larry spoke to. I think because of the strength of the agreement, it warrants that.
So, I mean, I just don't feel comfortable not giving future legislators opportunity to get more. That's that point. My second, like, one of the bigger concerns is kind of similar lines in terms of section 7. There's language that states that the city should not challenge any tax exemption status at the state house. Who exactly is the city that LODO? Is that administration? Is that city councilors? Can we elaborate a little bit on that?
It's the city government, which includes the administration and the city council.
It's two things I want to jump in and just lose my thought. So one is on that comment, we have Representative Sanchez here. So if he wants to, on the state level, put some legislation in to go with the tax exempt, he with this agreement can do that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then the second thing I want to just comment is that this other thing, with 20-year deal, I know you've been here 20 years. I've been here 35, so I know
37.
37, okay. So basically, that's what happened back when they sustained the city did a 20-year deal. Is that correct? That's correct. And we didn't have any issues or questions about that back 20 years ago. Like we obviously us as council people, me only one term, we had no choice because the 4 years was already done. So it's not nothing that's new.
No, if I may just extend that. Check. That agreement, that was historic itself, was high. So this will probably apply that. These are voluntary agreements. You do not pick up the law tax. You cannot take them. Please know that. So in the past 2 years, we found ourselves trust against the budget deficit. If we derive those payments, we can social so stability. Spend more. German administration. I believe it was.
One last thing. 20 years ago, when Mayor Sicily did this, he could, like the mayor, the current mayor, could have done this on their own without the council involved, right? I was on the council, but I was with the fire department. I remember back in the day that the mayor Sicily did this without the council. I don't know. That's true.
Yes, that's true. Conscious, appropriate decision to present these agreements to.
So basically, he could have signed, this administration could have signed it like the previous administration did 20 years ago without any council involved. Correct.
Correct, yes. Of course, with there are provisions within the MOA that eventually down the road, that there are precedent that would require the MOU itself, the outset of the MOU.
Okay, I just want to put that out there, because some of the newer councils, not that old, have been in term. But what I want to reiterate or try to put out there is some of the council people think they have leverage, really don't have any leverage, because actually the agreement between the ministry and the colleges, like it was 20 years ago, never came to the council. So we can't say, I have no problem to sit my board, or if I did, I couldn't go and say, hey, I want to have this, this, and this, because obviously the voluntary payments. put it out there. Dating myself, but I'm counsel, I was working with the city. Have you guys heard?
Yeah, if I could just follow up on that point, I think it is, and we went into these discussions and negotiations, understanding that the baseline is that the city is not absolutely, the city doesn't have the legal authority to receive anything. From these entities, these payments are voluntary. So that was very clear part of the process. That these are not taxes, it's not tax payment. Voluntary payment.
Okay, thank you, Simon Providence.
No, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so
Everyone talk really into their mics closely, because if people want to be texted, they can hear us.
Yeah, so I mean, I would just like to state that technically we're speaking in legal terms, but I mean, we all know that universities want to contribute to the city. The administration could have gone and signed this agreement alone, but I just don't think that that would be in the best interest of everyone. We want to be working partners in legislative government. So I mean, I appreciate you guys for coming here. And I mean, anyone that I talk to, all over the political spectrum ideology. This is something that everyone agrees on. I remember one of the last council meetings, the last council, Councilor Marducci, this is one of his main talking points, whatever we what this next council really needs to go after the universities and try to get more. And that's my biggest responsibility as a counselor for my constituents is to try to get most. We all know that we're not legally entitled. I mean, I'll take the PR, the organizing, our community to the table anytime, any day. I think this is something that's where it led to. I mean, I'm glad that we're not doing that. It's not an easy fight. I'm glad that we're all here sitting around this table and having these conversations. But I mean, I just wanted to put that out there that they could have done that, but would have been a little messy for everyone to share. And my second or third, fourth question, ask them all. We have a lot of colleagues there that probably have similar questions. Can you guys or someone from Brown University just give us an idea or vision of what they have for this land? Obviously, we know that it's going to have to go through the city council, but I just think it's kind of a little out there that we're agreeing to something. And we all see the dollar amount, get excited. Have no idea of what this institution or Brown specifically has in store for these streets. I mean, I don't want to get to the point where we sign this agreement, take money out, and then the university comes to the CPC, to the city council, and proposes a plan that's just not aligned with the goals of city residents. And what type of environment does that create? Where, I mean, it might not even be us as council, it just puts the same amount of pressure on the next council in 4 years too. I just would like to have a little idea of what the plan for these city streets, public property would be.
Do you all, this is just a logistics question, do you want us to go back and forth? Or do you want us to hold questions to the institutions to the side? Track them?
I think I.
What's that? Well, I mean, since you asked the question, I would rather have an answer now.
So just before us comes out, I want to be clear, the street advances have to go to the CDC and the council for approval. So there's no scenario where Brown proposes something that isn't consistent with what we as a city all want to see. That is ultimately. But let's let Russ speak to the future.
Are we be sworn in, please?
Raise your right hand. Can you swear that the council appropriately that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, not that? State your name and your for the record, please.
Gary, I spent our planning Brown University. So thanks very much, Councilman, for the question. I think, and we talked about a little bit of this, I think it's in the, before the announcement. We don't have specific plans, and go back a little bit to the 2012 MOA, which other institutions had similar arrangements. I can speak obviously specifically to Brown. So that agreement with American Bears Administration, which was approved by the council, and then the process was followed to technically abandon the streets. There were 3 blocks: Olive Street, parts of Brown Street, and parts of Melville Street, all of which came to the university in exchange for those spots. Of those blocks, only one has changed. So the Olive Street between Thayer and Brown Street became part of what's now the Performing Arts Center site, a new building that's opening that employed hundreds and hundreds of union laborers and put hundreds of millions of dollars into the construction industry, and actually kept the construction industry going during COVID, along with a number of other Brown projects. And that street became assumed into that construction site, into that building footprint. The other 2 are public streets now. They're privately owned, so it's technically not public streets, but they remain open and we haven't done anything with them. Our very clear commitment, and we said in our announcement of these agreements, is that any plans will come forward through the appropriate city approval processes in consultation with the neighborhood. In the Jewelry District, in fact, one of my colleagues is with the Jewelry District Association right now talking about it. Spoke last night at the College Hill Neighborhood Association about it. I know Councilman was there for that. And in the Jewelry District in particular, one of those blocks of Richmond Street, which is immediately adjacent to the integrated life sciences building site, even apart from this agreement, most likely has to close at least temporarily during the construction of that building. But our hope and expectation was that it would then become part of public space, green space. As part of that building project, we had a significant amount of streetscape, public space on the first floor to really engage with the community, in part to also then qualify for the height bonuses under the zoning ordinance. And so that block would be a natural extension of that. And one of the things that, as we've worked in the Jewelry District for almost 2 decades, the Jewelry District Association, a persistent and common issue is the lack of green space and the lack of pedestrian friendly space. That street is very narrow and frankly a little bit dangerous. The other 3 blocks there, we would really have to develop plans in consultation with the neighborhood, and they may be none. If we just stay the way they are, as those 2 streets that I mentioned on College Hill have for the last decade. Similar on Cushing Street. I don't have any immediate or near-term plans for that. There's definitely some pedestrian safety issues between that street and Oak Street. And I think those are things that we take out to the Councilman Anthony and reward and see what the community would support. We will move forward with those petition processes quickly, but that, as we develop plans over time, they'd absolutely be in consultation with the neighborhood. We think they can be improvements for the neighborhood, particularly that block of Richmond Street, which right now I don't think is detracting from the neighborhood.
Any questions? Finance. What, do you have a question for the?
You could be a part of this,
If anybody has any questions.
So I just want to say, I really, really appreciate the hard work of the administration, but also the universities throughout this process. I think this has been a very, very robust process. And generally speaking, I think this agreement is incredibly positive for the city of Providence. You're talking about a 123% increase. And, I'm a little biased, Brown's my alma mater, my 2-time alma mater. And I think we want to affirm particularly Brown's commitment to the expansion of investment in the Jewelry District, over $340 million invested in the Jewelry District to date. There have been lots of great contributions all across the city of Providence, but particularly in Ward 1, so we're grateful for that. I do have a few questions here, however, and I think it's probably relevant for everyone. So I've been looking at page 5, where it says that the extension of the I-2 zone to include the ground-owned parcel on the northeast corner of Howard and Brook Streets by no later than 6 months from submission by ground of complete application and or petition. I don't know if the administration is privy to this, but there were ongoing discussions with Brown for many years about the Brook Street norms. Our neighborhood associations and also neighborhood residents were very concerned about this project. We, Councilwoman Anthony and I, actually, solely in my ward where we work together on this, we heard the neighbors and their concerns. There were over 1,100 neighbors who petitioned for certain recommendations in that process. The university flat out rejected those recommendations, but did come back with some concessions, which we're really, really thankful for. They reduced the maximum scale of that project. There was more green space that was added, which was recommendation from some of the neighborhood residents. I know they're paying commercial property taxes on the properties that were once there, so that they will form a east side mini park, and I think that's contributing about 44,000 roughly to the city every single fiscal year. However, so and the other thing I want to mention is we worked very hard for years on expanding the College Hill Historic District overlay. That was a legislative process. Brown came out in opposition to that. There were also unions who came out in opposition to the expansion of the historic district overlay. This clause just feels, to me personally, like a bit of an overreach from the administration's perspective. There's a lot of work that was done legislatively to mitigate some of the challenges here, and this is included in this agreement. So I would love to just hear more about how fluid is this, and is this, and I know, this would go through the normal CPC channels, but it just seems a bit out of place considering, the ongoing work that's been done, particularly in this neighborhood to mitigate some of the challenges.
So I think I can actually speak to also back to the city if needed. So we put that in there to fulfill that commitment, exactly, to build a house there. Because as you remember, that was one of, I totally agree with everything. A lot of our commitments was to build a residential home, tax-paying, commercial revenue, protect the historic edge of that street, and the historic district line that was the expansion already existed that runs through half that lot. It's a non-conforming lot, so we went to zoning last year to get approval for that house. It was rejected both by staff of the city and by the board. And the advice at the time was that the appropriate way to do this was to include the institutional zone. So by seeking permission to include the institutional support to include the institutional zone, the only thing to go there is a residential home. Certainly we'll make that commitment, and this will be a way to follow through on that. Otherwise, it's going to stay as an open tooth essentially, and not shield, let's say, that particularly that block of Power Street from institutional encroachment. So that's what that is about entirely, is to fulfill that commitment to the neighborhood, nothing else.
So this is essentially a way for the administration.
It allows us to solve the problem that you and I couldn't figure, that we were prohibited from figuring out because of the zoning, we had just gotten here previously. So it would enable that project.
Got it. Thank you for that clarification. So this is going to be done administratively.
It'll have to go through all of the processes. So the intention is, that if it were to pass through all the processes, then that project that we had tried to figure out a way to accomplish together previously would be.
We'll certainly agree to that process and be limited in whatever appropriate way to a residential home, not to any institutional use.
And the next question, just a brief question, is I know Councilwoman Anderson spoke about this. So maybe this is intentionally brought in the agreement, but the location of the Providence police substation, obviously, the east side councilors would like to see it stay on the east side. It's the city's intending to use funds from the agreement to relocate that police substation. Is there any intention for Brown to potentially lease any space that it has available? I know the John Street location was one that was looked into for quite some time. Or is this just relegating this to the city with some support from Brown from a funding perspective?
But I can start, I also give you your, some of my ideas, the backstory of a couple of efforts. So as you all know, when we go to grocery residence halls, that displays the substation on Brook Street that we hosted for more than 20 years. We also host a substation in the Jewelry District as well. When we knew we were more than a year away from when that substation had to move, we talked extensively with Chief Clements at the time about options for relocating it that we would pay for. And we offered the space on John Street that you referred to, and he didn't want it. I think it was not particularly a little bit of its location and more just the parking around it that was available to them was not going to work from his perspective. Now, current leadership might feel differently, but that was the opinion at the time. And so we made other suggestions about city-owned property that's currently underutilized or not utilized in districts 8 and 9. And he was going to pursue that. And then he left and nothing happened with it. And then we stepped forward to temporarily support it, which has been, originally we thought would be just a few months, well, not a permanent spot. And it's been at that Cushing Street location. It's not ideal for their needs, and it's not a long-term solution. It's not a substation, it's not District 8 9. So we want it to be in this side too, and certainly want to cooperate with that, but it has to move, and I think this is a way to make that possible. But where it is located, it has to, I think it has to be that.
Perhaps it's just something to think about. Directing Brook Street. I can see the parking working there, but I'm not sure.
Thank you, Councilwoman Pierce. Now we'll go back to the finance people.
Thank you. So just, I want to make sure that this was over again, because I want to make sure that I have the full understanding. This is not an obligation, this is a voluntary thing, correct? These are voluntary.
That's correct.
As I read this, the city asked through this MOU specifically, I'm referring to, city has asked to alter zoning for the parking and biking requirements, relinquish any opportunities to alter the master plan currently in place, give up transitional property status for the life of the agreement, increase quality of life enforcement, restrict the ability of the city to request any additional financial compensation over the next 20 years, and restrict the city's ability to impose the state tax or more. If we, additionally, we're not allowed to, and this is where I have a more of a key question. There's an additional piece here that says other payments and taxes. We are also not allowed to charge, impose any tax fees, charges, or payments that are not in effect as of the date of this amendment. Can you define a little bit more what those taxes, fees, charges, or payments would be? Or can you give me an example? It would be on page 6. The last. Oh, the memo. Sorry, I'm looking at this. I apologize. Yes. Yes.
primary concern. Ensure that, in no way through disagreements, the payments they're making are classified as tax payments. They're not required to make tax payments, and we don't have the authority to tax them. And so I think that their concern here was to ensure that the language of the agreement reinforce that this is a memorandum of understanding by which their payments to us are voluntary and cannot be classified as taxes.
So for further clarification, it's still non-binding.
Yes, and depending on how you define it, yes, it's non-binding in the sense that they have no legal obligation.
As for the previous.
Thank you. I believe wholeheartedly that while we had good measures previously, we have an opportunity to do that much more. And I do appreciate the amount of work that has gone into doing something like this. I applaud all of the effort that does not go unnoticed. There are several things here, though, that I find are questionable. I think certainly councilors have already tapped on some of that. One of them specifically is and I have a larger conversation around community contributions, but the very first piece of the community contribution portion says that tax revenue generated by the commercial users shouldn't be, that they will be considered community contribution. And I vehemently oppose that being considered a community contribution. That is an obligation as of state law starting next year. I think it's rightful that we strike that from this agreement. I think it's only fair to the constituent community, of the city. The second one, and I think Councilor Sanchez also touched on this a little bit. In Article 7, in the miscellaneous portion of Article 7, we all what we're doing, and I can read it very quickly. What we're asking, and I would like a different interpretation of this because as I continue to read it makes me believe that we are continuing in this agreement over the next 20 years. We are going to bind future councils in being able to do anything or act in any way that is not respective of this agreement as it pertains to the financial requests to the. I think that binding many city councils and future city councils is a hindrance. That's a hindrance to the city, but in and of itself, as elected officials, not being able to advocate for more financial contributions in one opportunity that we have, and a very big one, I might add, is just not, it's just not fair to the residents of the community. So I kind of want a little bit more of elaboration on this particular article, just because I need to be able to understand that the universities are intending to bind any city councilors or any future city councils into an agreement or any situations that would further hinder our financial responsibilities.
So it is a 20-year agreement, and so it does, to the extent that the universities, the city, apply the terms of the agreement. Well, what about
It's still not right. I just keep going back to the same thing over and over again because it seems to me, hang on one second, it seems to me that we continue to provide that much more. We as a city are trying to go above and beyond. And there's several clauses in this agreement that say, in the event that you do this, we are no longer responsible. In the event that you do something else, we are no longer responsible. Oh, but wait, you can't go to the state to ask for any more money. Oh, but hang on one second, you can't come and ask us for anything else in the next 2 years. It becomes very hindering to be able to seek resource from the university
And that's to me something that I don't necessarily know would be beneficial to them.
So certainly if payment would stop, if the universities make payments, then the city is likewise not obligated by its obligations. So it's a voluntary memorandum of understanding that requires understanding between the two parties. So as long as the two parties continue to maintain this understanding, it's an effect. But if one party doesn't remain in compliance, then the other party does not. There's no prohibition against requesting money from the state. The prohibition against the city as an entity seeking, requesting that the state change the law. It's a legal prohibition against the city charging taxes.
But also fees or any other sort of fees, right? And that's great. Moving on from there, one of the things that I also wanted to just lastly address, and I'll at this point, in terms of transitional properties, while I understand that the commercial lease law will take into effect next year, I believe that removing our opportunity to continue with transitional properties is not necessary. Gradual decreases over are easier to recover from, and using the example that Councilwoman Anderbach utilized earlier, in a very dire situation, where the city has been in a dire situation before. And we use the university purchasing Providence Place Mall. Universities have an endowment large enough to be able to purchase. And if something like a Providence Place Mall were to go into sale and used for institutional purposes, that tax money that we would have had initially, we would be able to recover. That's a substantial amount of money that we would no longer have on our tax. So I would request that the negotiators come back to the table and consider adding something with transitional properties to a certain amount of time, maybe not 15 years if that's not something that's seen fit. But these gradual decreases would be much easier as a city to recover from if we were able to recoup some of that in a different way. As it's laid out, we would lose dollars immediately. And it's just again, another financial line. I just want to respond. I just want to be clear that for the period of time that the transition parcel requirement was in place, the value of properties acquired by the institutions was just about $2 million over that 20-year period. So as you're contemplating signing an agreement that guarantees $223 million against something over the previous 20 years that has only taken $2 million, that's the decision to make. The other thing that is interesting is the value of properties that have come off the tax rolls since 2020. It's $150,000. So when you look at the kind of schedule of transitions, there were many in the early 2000s. There have not been many. Christina's had one for the life of the agreement. So it's a strategy question. As stated, you'd rather have a guaranteed funding source that is reliable, that you know will come and deliver significant money, or if you want to take the chance on banking on institutions further exempting properties and having to phase them out of the period.
Just to answer what you had said, I think there's an opportunity here to do both. I think we need to be very responsible and have both cases come into play. Should the universities are probably, I can't think of anybody off the top of my head, or any other company or organization, they're the only ones that could potentially play into something of as big as a purchase of a Superman building, or probably so small. So these are things that we should consider in the event that the city goes into a financial distress that we've been in the past. That's all.
it will go back to the finance committee, Councilman Sanchez, then Councilman Andrew, then we'll adjourn this council. That's the next thing.
Thank you, Chairman. Just two pretty straightforward questions. First one, was anyone with like a zoning background at the negotiation table with administration? Who was that? Who was that?
These are, to help pay for things also like systems. And also from the solicitor's office.
My second question, slash concern, regarding the parking license condition in the MOA. Is there any way that we can get that language from the 2012 agreement into this agreement? Because I wasn't around in 2012. Is there a reason that we're just referencing that language and not having it exactly in this new agreement?
Well, it's the same, they're specifically incorporating. it. So it's as if it's there. It effectively means specifically reincorporate that language.
So what's the, like, just the difference between having the language in the agreement compared to having it referenced?
There is no.
So, I mean, would it be like a major request to get that language into there?
Typically how these kinds of agreements are, but
I'm trying to believe you, but also like something else in here, so I apologize for the weird eye contact. I just have two quick things. One is a question and one's not. I also just want to say, super possibly, I was really excited to see on package page 26, climate change and resilience and adaptation infrastructure and policy be part of what can be part of the community contributions. Some of the universities in particular are doing some really big work on climate resilience. And as a city, it's just going to be such a, it already is such a compounding problem. And yeah, I see that face. Instead of having them continue with us and keep through not only the policy, but potentially like contributing. Yeah, I'm just really excited about that and excited to be a partner and ways I can to help understand that. So one, that's just something I was super pumped about. And then I have one other question, which is on what, but I have one other also today, which is on page 29, the first bullet, where we talk about the city further commits to the first sub-bullet, make no changes to the institutional master plan process or shrinkage of I2 or I3E zones, including overlays as defined by the city's Providence zoning ordinance or December 2014. And just since we're in, and then there's some more zoning stuff underneath, I've got to read out loud because I think it's boring, but we're in the middle of the comp plan process. There's another comp plan process happening in 10 years. In the midst of this. So I'm wondering, like, I understand why the universities would love this, but from our perspective, we're in the middle of that process now. And I think I know a lot of my neighbors have things they'd love to build this for 20 years. Is there any leeway here, knowing that we go through this comprehensive process where we envision the city, but then this direct impact of the zoning codes? That's why I guess it's more just a comment of a concern, like we go through this whole process, you know, only every 10 years, and we're saying we're not going to touch this for so it's just, as we're envisioning the city, we're getting all this feedback from our neighbors, hopefully we'll be there in 10 years. You know, but then this part is kind of just a formal for us to think about. Does that make sense? Like we're saying, like we're committing to not changing the zoning code for no shrinkage. We're not going to change their planning process, like for the land. So just a like, it's just not like what
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make a few comments. Members of the administration, feel free to jump in after or representation from the institution. I just want to take you all through my concerns. I still am concerned about the dollar amount
but I've been more compelled to stand against these provisions, these structural provisions of the agreement. I'm gonna start with the cash contributions and the community benefit credits. This agreement, it is true that it's better than the agreement from the previous administration, Angel's Farms. No doubt about that. It has been called a national model, and I would argue that this agreement falls short of meeting the model, the pilot model in Boston. And for my colleagues who are listening to this, Boston has a 25% threshold. In Boston, and yes, Boston has about 47 institutions. Big or small, even small colleges are asked to pay 25% of what they would if they were taxed at their current rate, or they could split that. 12.5% goes to our cash contributions, or 12.5% is community benefits. Right now, and I'll give credit to Brown, they roughly yearly are paying 16% in cash contributions. If Brown was taxed at 16, if they were asked to pay 16% of what they would pay if they were taxed, this is in the current agreement. So I say that to say is that this has been talked about as a national model, but we're not even close to the model in Boston. Our neighbors who are just 40 minutes away. Brown University, right now, it has promised to contribute 16% of what they would, if they were taxed at our current rate. JWU is 6%, RISD is 6%, PC is 7.6%. This is far below the 25% threshold. Well, our neighbors 40 minutes away are asking of their institutions. So I have an issue with that. And I would like for us to have a similar model to our neighbor. The second thing I want to pivot to, and I'm going to be frank with you all, I think this is an extremely undemocratic agreement. Colleagues, I want you to understand this, and members of the administration, when I'm done with my remarks, feel free to challenge me on this. But in these provisions, we have to really take seriously. The next 20 years, if we sign this agreement, there will be a gag order placed on us. We cannot advocate, or future councils in the next 20 years, we cannot advocate at the General Assembly to challenge their tax exempt status. We can't even, my Councilor Taylor, you said we have no leverage, and to some degree that's true. Well, if we aim this agreement, we have less leverage. Representative Sanchez is here. If Representative Sanchez, under this agreement, helps us change a state law that would allow us to get revenue for the city through so not just a tax, a fee. We can't, under this agreement, if there's a change in state law, Councilor, under this agreement, we cannot accept that change. So for example, if Representative Sanchez passes a law that says, that allows towns and cities to charge these institutions fees, service fees. If the state law changes and not a tax, a fee, under this agreement, we cannot accept that change in state law. So while we might not be able to even lobby or advocate as a council in the next 20 years, if our representative senators make state changes in state law, again, that would allow us to get more revenue from these institutions, we can't, under this agreement, we cannot except that changes state law. Otherwise, this agreement would be void. So this is for us to tie up the political system through this agreement for the next 20 years, in my view, is very dangerous. The other thing I want to say is, give credit to Mayor Smiley for this and administration. You all went to the General Assembly and got a bill passed to allow us to get commercial tax revenue from these institutions. And you should be applauded, and I have applauded you all, and I continue to do so. However, it's worth knowing, colleagues, under this current agreement, that would not be possible if this agreement was signed before we got that done. I want you to think about that. The next 20 years. The other, I just want to mention a couple more points. So again, over 20 years in this agreement, it's pretty explicit about this. We can't go back and ask for another dime. And yes, we hopefully, there has been some remarks suggesting that we could do what the mayor Tavares did, is ask the institutions to come back to the table. Yes, we could do that, but under this agreement, it says we can't even ask them for a dime in 20 years. And to me, I can't predict what the financial landscape of the city is going to look like. And for us to ink this with that provision in there is irresponsible in my opinion. The other thing I would say is in this agreement, some counselors, I don't have an institution in my neighborhood. Some counselors and residents that we represent are really worried about the expansion of some of these institutions. And it's pretty explicit. We cannot, under this agreement, prevent or make any changes to the I zones. So if we wanted to change the zoning laws to prevent the expansion of these institutions under this agreement, if we agree to that, that would be a credit against the city. So these are voluntary payments. If these institutions, and I hope they will, and I feel good about they will, but if they decide not to fulfill cash contributions or community benefits on any given year, there's no recourse. They're voluntary contributions. So there's no recourse for us if they don't pay. They have essentially said, you can't come back to us and ask for a dime. They've also tied up the political system on us for the next 20 years. They have dotted their I's and crossed their T's. And for the folks representing these institutions, I know this seems like I'm coming down rhetorically with a heavy hand. If I had this agreement, I would have had these concerns expressed to you when we had met. I just didn't have the agreement then. So I wanted to share that. These provisions, it's not even a dollar amount. Granted, we're not even close to the Boston model. We are in terms of cash and community benefits as far as that, but in terms of the 25% threshold, we're not there yet. And if we're going to say this is a national model, we need to at least have a similar structure to the one that exists in our neighbor Boston. So with that, I'm happy to, hear any comments.
Can I just respond? Sure. I want to make sure folks have the facts. So while Boston sets a target, the educational institutions don't achieve the target. So it's not true that the educational institutions in Boston are getting 25% of the assessed value. In fact, the total amount paid last year was $14 million, which if you look at the proportion of the budget, compare Boston to Providence, proportionally we're getting more than Boston. So I want to be sure that we're construing things accurately.
Sure, for the court, could I just say, that's because right? They're not fulfilling their promise of cash contributions. So that can happen too here. And in fact, what's happening in Morriston is that the sort of the community benefits portion of it, what institutions in Boston like Harvard have not always made their cash contribution promise. Instead, what they've done to the residents of Boston is, you are correct, Boston, we are not paying our cash contribution on time. However, we are fulfilling our community benefits.
But disagreement is not allowed. The Boston, so I really take exception to saying that Boston has a better structure that is more responsible. Disagreement is not allowed for that. It does not allow the institutions to reduce their voluntary payments by making community contributions. If an institution doesn't make their payments, then this agreement is not valid because we're not in a memorandum of understanding anymore. So your representation that they could not make payments and we're still prohibited from advocating is not true. Because if they're not making payments, this agreement doesn't stand. So I want to be sure that while we're explaining things to our constituents, things that are very complicated, that we're being clear about what the truth is. And what you're describing that is happening in Boston cannot happen under the context.
Respectfully, I don't want to get caught in this, I don't want to get caught in like, what happens if they don't pay, then I do understand that.
Counselor, you did say that. I don't want to interrupt you, but you did say that. You said they could not pay and we would be hamstrung. That is not true.
So let me, if I misspoke. My point is that Brown has asked their institutions to contribute 25%. That's my, what I'm really trying to get at. And yes, it is true that in this agreement, if the institutions do not follow or fulfill their promises, it also means that we co-walk away, which I think is what you're saying.
Right, and so Boston, it has a process of asking for 25%, but it is not delivering proportionally more money than we're getting. What we're delivering is agreement over 20 years that doesn't require us every year to say, can we please have 25% and then cross our fingers to see what we're going to get. In fact, it gives us a consistent payment over time that is in total proportionally more as it relates to our budget than theirs. And I want to say to my colleagues in Boston, I think the way they've done community contributions and the way they're reporting is excellent, and is the way that I will model that process for us. And so I think there's a lot of good to learn there. But when you look at specifically how the voluntary payments are made from their education institutions, there is no question that Providence is doing better with this.
President Pro Tem Machado, I'm going to make a comment first, then we'll President Pro Tem Machado, and then Councilor Fox. That will be the next two after I make a couple comments. With my councilman over here directed stuff at me. I feel I have to respond. So I'm going to go to the 37-year-old veteran, the CFO Larry Mancini, and ask the question: in the last 20 years, the agreement, has any institution missed a payment at all?
Thank you for the question. Absolutely not.
I'd like to remind my colleagues, we went through some of the toughest times with COVID that's happened. I know by listening to them, and I know by people going to college, their enrollment went down, and it probably continues to go down before and after COVID. So take into consideration the money that they probably weren't bringing in, and then they kept their payments up. So for us to say, we're not going to pay in 20 years, we're our hands are tied. They haven't paid us in 20 years. We've been through some serious economic challenges with them, and they have paid their payments all the way through. Also, as a PC alum, I'm going to have to plug PC because he kind of said that they're only paying 7%, 7 point something, versus the 12%. But we also have to take into consideration what PC does for our economic in Providence. They have PC games that's sold out for the last, I don't know how many years at the Dunkin' Ball. I'm gonna date myself, what is it now? The Dunkin' Donuts, it's a Dunkin' Donuts. Yeah, that's it, I couldn't think of it. So, and also with their hockey, so they do bring in extra money to our economy that's not showed in these figures. That this showed, as well as Brown University has their football team, and people go there, that's not shown in it. So when they come in, when they come in, people go to these games, people leave, you can go to Blake's Tavern any night on a game that PC is playing, and that place is packed. It wouldn't be packed if they weren't going to that game. So I just want to.
Could I comment? So Counselor, you had brought up the leverage point, and I thought that is, I just feel like there's been some nihilism that's been trickling into this dialogue around climate. It is true that we don't have significant leverage, but you had brought up, I think, a point about, well, I had brought it up. So over the next 20 years, we are not able to lobby the General Assembly to get more revenue from these institutions. And not only can we not lobby, we can't accept any benefits of a change in state law that would give us more revenue. So if we sign off on this, we lose more leverage because we can't predict what the next 20 years will look like.
I still disagree with you. I think the General Assembly can do it, but I'm going to give it to.
No, yeah, I'll just, I mean, we can't reject laws that are passed by the General Assembly. If the General Assembly passes a law that grants more revenue to us, we absolutely can accept it. I think that perhaps what we're referring to, Councilman, that if the state were to pass a law that imposes new taxes or fees on them, then the revenue we receive from them would be used to offset payments so that it does not tack on top of the payments that they're voluntarily agreeing to take. But we wouldn't be able to refuse to accept fees or taxes that are assessed via state law. And we absolutely have a right to collect and accept any revenue that would be entitled to pursuant to any changes in state law. And I guess I would also just, again, reinforce something that we've talked about a few times now, that this is an MOU, it's an understanding. If somehow the General Assembly, I think he asked the Councilman Sanchez's brother, were willing to pass some change in state law that would give the city leverage or authorize the city to be able to tax the institutions at amounts greater than what the voluntary payments are, well, then the city could do that, and that would be effectively the end of the agreement. There would be no MOU, presumably, if we were pursuing to state law taxing the institutions at a higher level.
Sorry, one is last comment, and then I give the microphone to my colleagues. So to be super clear, that is true. Let me clarify why I bring this up. If there is a change in state law that allows us to collect more revenue, the problem is, it is not fair that becomes a credit against us, and/or it allows these institutions to reduce their payments. Call it offsetting, or however you would like, I just feel like that is wrong. So I want to clarify.
Sure, that makes sense. I think perhaps one way to look at it is this, that when we talk about the offsetting and what the fair enough. This MOU establishes payments that create a certain baseline that are the payments that the city is going to be entitled to. It's a baseline from which we can't, we could offset, so that's it. That's the payments that we're entitled to, unless the state were to pass something that permits the city to access more. But without the agreement, our baseline is zero. Currently have no, I've heard the term leverage thrown around a little bit, and the majority leader is correct, we don't have it. Because we don't have state law that permits us to tax the institutions. So our baseline without the agreement is zero. And the baseline with the agreement is the amounts that the chief operating officer has referenced in the presentation.
Thank you.
Just a quick comment. So I remember when we met with institutions, she said something about decreasing enrollment. My understanding, I think Jay was the only one that seen significant decrease. I think Brown and DC have grown a tiny bit, and Risky has stayed pretty consistent in the last 10 years. If anyone wants to correct that.
Okay, Councilor Patel.
Different answer.
That's correct, that's the correct statement.
I just, I think it states that, but that's great. Well, mistakes.
Thank you. I guess time will tell if this is gonna be a model, right? And I do commend the administration for, adhering to the call that we made to the council to go negotiate on behalf of the residents of Providence. I think that the frustration for many, including myself, is the taxpayers. Those of us who continue to pay higher taxes. And yes, the argument was made that in the past 8 years or 9 years, the taxes will not increase. And yes, what we want is more revenue from these institutions who make up pretty much almost above 40% that are not being taxed. And the resident, while I don't have a hospital or school, Ivy League school, or even a school in my neighborhood, we are all Providence. We're all paying the taxes. We all should care. Just because we don't have a PC or Brown or Risky, the fact is that Brown and Risky pretty much own half of Providence, right? Where the river is pretty much the front, they own a lot of that. Whether they have other sub division or whatever, the medical corridor is all nonprofit and is continuing alongside Eddy Street, Allen's Avenue, and encroaching in the neighborhood. So when my colleague, Councilman Roya states that it is true, I have some of these questions in the sense that it will be a worthless exercise to try to even tap a fee, a municipal fee, whether it's through the legislature or city council, for any student housing. This will negate this contract. And so, I think you clarified it in essence that in essence, this is the beginning. We have acquired, at least on the table, 138% compared to what we were getting. But, and it's voluntary because we don't have any state law, we have any federal law because it's nonprofit. So my question to whoever could answer this is that, one, has the city received all the payments agreed up to this point from the current understanding?
Yes.
In full?
These four institutions are, I think, maybe the only institutions that will make other payments. for the right to-
And are there any other institutions that have not paid under their agreement?
Lifespan is currently not under an agreement, not paid payments.
Can I just clarify, Chip, that this is connected to your question, but wasn't there, the prior fiscal year, wasn't there a shortfall?
Yes, because the previous administration budgeted for more than what was guaranteed in the agreement. Because the 2012 agreement expired in 2022.
Got it, so it was what was in the MOU, it just wasn't an additional payment tax.
That's I just also want to clarify because the 40% number has been thrown around previously by a lot of people, and I want to be sure that we recognize that 40% is not the number of the percentage of land held by these four institutions.
Right.
There's about
There's others.
33% of property in Providence is tax exempt. That covers lots of different kinds of institutions. When you look at these four institutions, it's like 10% of gross value or something to that effect.
Correct. The point that I was making is the point of view from our taxpayers and the residents. And
That's right. And it's why it's so important that other institutions come to the table and make commitments.
Agreed. And I'm glad that you clarify that because it's also misinformation, but also residents feeling that they're getting the short end of the stick when these conversations are taking place. In reference to the legal, I think you explained it, but I wanted to, if you can explain to me this on page 14, where it says legal compliance condition. And there's other languages there in these agreements that if we were to go through each one, or I think we've done some of that. This is one of the reasons why we have this hearing, right? So that way we can ask these questions. I know that Councilwoman Peterson just indicated and asked them to request to amend some type of these language. But can you just explain that to us in terms of, you know, the legal compliance, the existing memorandum unaffected and non-performing default remedies? Those three.
So that's within the MOA, not the MOU.
Yeah.
So that's the memorandum of agreement. And I think I spoke earlier, and I apologize, I was using very legal language as condition precedent. But it is as.
So that way people that are hearing this can understand it.
Sure.
In layman's terms.
Sure.
Thank you.
I think going back to very early in this meeting where, in response to Councilman Antoine's question, the difference between the MOA and the MOU is that the MOA is a transactional agreement. That certain Brown is going to receive certain things, and in return for that, they're going to make payments. But the legal compliance condition refers to the things that must happen for Brown to be required to make payments. Brown's, this is not a voluntary payment agreement. This is they get certain things and they pay for them. So these compliance conditions are referring to things that have to happen so that Brown has to make payments. And specifically, you know, we talked a bunch about zoning, and I think the chief referenced the fact that we were working with planning as well as the appropriate attorneys in the law department to ensure that we had proper language in here to respect our zoning laws and our zoning processes. So these things, these conditions require proper approvals by both the CPC and the city council. And if they don't happen, then the city will not have met its conditions, and Brown won't have to make its payments, again, under the MOA. The MOU is completely separate, voluntary, payments. The MOA, again, is a transaction. Certain things go to Brown. If they happen, Brown has to make payments. So does that explain the condition? Because it's conditional. There's no guarantee that they'll get it. The zoning will be approved.
I know it's more specific than.
That's right.
Yes.
Thank you for that explanation. What role does the legislative body and the state have in this, MOU and some extent once it's passed through the city? Does it impact the reimbursement from the state to the city at all?
No.
What role do they have?
No.
They don't have to, in a sense, pass it to the general assembly?
No.
Anything like that?
This is an agreement between the institutions as parties, and the city.
Thank you.
Councilman Vargas and then Councilman Gonzalez.
Thank you. So, this agreement is what, why? Person who wrote it, lawyer who wrote it. You wrote it like the ends. See? According to the only information I see is, you guys are protected 120%. No matter what we do after we sign, we're using the money. This agreement has to be revised. Because it's not fair that in 10 years, the new council, whatever comes, will have the leverage to go and ask for more. Inflation was up there. What about the taxpayers? Taxes will go up. According to the 501c3, the beautiful number, 501c3 report is a non-profit. Everybody knows it. Because wherever they buy, whenever they put an hand on, that's free. It's not fair for the taxpayers of the city of Providence. It's not fair for my constituents. We have to review this agreement again. And see what we do. Thank you.
Councilman Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chairman. So I just want to say I appreciate everyone's comments, comments that were made previously by my colleagues. And, there is a lot quantified by each and every university and institution here. I just want to commend them for the ways that they foster economic development in the city of Providence. I think Brown does a really good job at this. On their site, in fact, they have a really good sort of a table of what they contribute to the local economy in terms of investment, in terms of what they're doing locally. I mean, there's a lot that's there, so I would encourage people to look at that. I do think that simultaneously, one of the points that's been made by several of our colleagues here is that taxation is going up for folks across the city. Particularly, you think about your ward, for example, or Councilman Espinal's ward, there was a 60% increase on the evaluations. If we look at our ward, Ward 1, there was a 28% increase on valuations. And I mean, these are facts. So I just want to share this for the record. So Brown as an institution, for example, does have a $1.5 billion assessment. If they were charged or taxed like every other commercial property owner in the city, yield about roughly around $48 million to the city coffers every single year. Now, state law doesn't enable that, federal law doesn't enable that, so that's all just a hypothetical. But is there an opportunity, and I think this sort of connects everybody's points here, to potentially include a provision within this legal agreement that would account for properties that are taken off the tax rolls. So of course, Brown and other institutions quantify the work that they do in this, in the city, and that's all very important work. But what about the losses from properties that are acquired by these institutions? Is that something that can be included as a provision within this contractual agreement? Because theoretically, similar to Council Enderbaugh's point, if there's an institution that bought a property, took it off the tax rolls, that would come at a loss to the city.
Yeah, and the value of the properties that come off the tax rolls over a period of time has been much less than what's promised in this agreement. So,
Yeah, so just, that was $2 million, right, it was taken off the last 20 years.
Is that just commercial properties? Because that doesn't seem right to me.
no, let me look again. I think you're right.
I think that might just be commercial properties, because so theoretically, if an institution like Brown University expanded their footprint and took up more parcels in, let's say, College Hill or the Jewelry District, for example, that would thereby come at a loss to the city. In terms of taking those properties off the.
Yes, if they were used for exempt purposes. That's right.
So, but there's nothing in this agreement that protects the city from that rapid growth and expansion.
Instead, the agreement provides a guaranteed payment.
Just also on the top of that, keep in mind, because of the change in state law regarding commercial taxation, any properties that are purchased and leased to any entity would be taxed at full. So the only properties that would be purchased by the institution that they're using institutional, they're not leasing to any of them.
For educational purposes. But still, this is a theoretical situation. If they bought a parcel, they decided to build an educational building on that parcel, then that's a parcel that theoretically couldn't go on our tax rolls or create more housing. So that's significant.
That's right. The number that I quoted was the tax that came off the books as a result of the transition, not the assessment of those properties.
But again,
Yeah, so it's in a negotiation, it's a trade-off, right? So the administration could have anchored on a provision for transition parcels to continue and not perhaps received as much in a voluntary payment. And maybe no properties in the tax roll, so there's no transition, right? So it is a trade-off as to if you would like a kind of guaranteed payment. As a reminder, this year, we're only getting $875,000 in transition payments.
so was there no fluidity there? Is there no opportunity to maybe have a provision that, or is that just completely out of the question? I'm closing that as an open question.
Institutions' willingness to add more value to the agreement. I will, I don't know if they want to speak to that in committee or something.
So that's it. Sorry, it's very open.
No, it's all right. I'm happy to speak to it more generally. So I think, a couple of things I would say. So one is we've returned lots of properties to tax rolls. We have a program that's taken underutilized or student housing, rent houses, sold them to faculty and staff, and turned them into tax-paying properties. We're paying full taxes, the tax stabilization agreement for warehouse. We've done a significant amount of development for our commercial tenant, and they, as an anchor tenant, made projects like South Street Landing, 225 Dyer, the Lido Building, all possible, and producing tax revenue to the city, both through our direct occupation of those spaces as commercial tenants, and then making a larger project more basically feasible in the first place. Because none of those three things would have happened if RIDA was happening without Brown as an anchor tenant. And the state, both entities coming together, South Stream and RIDA, and also for $225, all of which are producing jobs and purchasing power and bringing to your board more people who want to spend money, which is a lot of what we do as an institution, is bring people here who want to spend money, who spend that money in Providence, buying things and employing people who do institutions directly, and then even staying here for a long period of time, who do local lots. So the other thing I would say is that by creating incentives for commercial development and tax revenue production in MOA that reduce our payments, that's directly incentivizing us to do more of these things. And I think that is really a core principle for President Maxson is to introduce these agreements, because the long-term value of tax revenue to the city is much greater than the diminishing value of the transition. The final thing I would say is the transition payment experience over the last 20 years was an administrative nightmare for both the institutions and for the city. And I think everybody who was involved would prefer not to go through that again. And we were willing to pay quite a bit more to not have that provision. So Brown's payment going respectively is 2.5 times what it was in the last 20 years. And we were more than willing to step up to that level. And we have incentives in mind for doing things that will help the institutions and the city grow together rather than be adversaries. I just make one final comment, because I do think that some of that spirit may have been lost in this discussion. We came into this, all four of us, wanting to be partners, building on a foundation of 20 years of success, where we all feel that these agreements are extremely important. Committing in year one to fully fill the $7 million placeholder in the budget for the institutions, and to how we can grow collaboratively together. That, and I think we, particularly speaking for Brown, take our role in the Jewelry District, for example, very seriously. How can we contribute to the city and the state to be economically viable in more difficult times come after? And I think that as an economic engine, all four of us can do that, but we have to do it together, seeing our success as mutually reinforcing. And that's the spirit that we brought to this agreement. It's not been acrimonious, we've not employed lobbyists, we've not tried to sneak around it. We've come forward willingly in a voluntary way, but in a committed way to be good partners and to do this in the city. We feel very strongly about that.
In fairness, I can say, we've seen that on the ground. I mean, everything that is produced in the Jewelry District, and I know it's like unique to Ward 1, but that is helping the entire city. Whether it's creating jobs, whether it's bringing more people into the city to spend dollars in all of our wards. So I would encourage people to, again, look at that page, because Brown does a good job at quantifying that. I don't know how well the other universities do it, but it is important to acknowledge. And I think on balance, I would again encourage everyone to look at it. And I think what you shared was beautifully said, because this is a symbiotic partnership and relationship for the long term of the residents of the city. So I appreciate the way you responded to the provision question. My last, really, I'll keep this really brief. Is there any way, and this is just sort of thinking about compromise isn't the word, but the perfect example is you mentioned the River House. So that was a property that was built, going to create over 200 units of housing in Ward 1, but for the city of Providence. And Brown obviously purchased that property, and now graduate students are going to be inhabiting that particular property. So it thereby sort of reduces all of those housing opportunities for people in the city. Brown was able to leverage the stabilization agreement from that was initially struck with the developer to build that property. Is there an opportunity to potentially introduce a provision within this agreement that would prohibit the transfer of a stabilization agreement in the event that a non-profit or institutional partner purchase a property from the developer. That's more of
Maybe a question.
a for legal,
But I do need to correct some of the premise of that. So the original instigation of the River Rapids project was we sought developers who would build commercial, tax-paying, market housing for graduate students. The intent of that, very forthrightly, publicly with city, state, and everybody, the intent of that project was for graduate student housing. We a lot of graduate students who there appears to provide very low graduate student housing, which has a negative impact on rewards in terms of seeking places to live. And so what we wanted to do was to really incentivize the market with our participation to build more graduate student housing. What actually happened was that they were then, that became a linchpin of that group to the South Street Planning Project, South Street Planning Garage, which became a huge economic engine of the state overall visual district. What happened in reality was the developer sold several times. So it wasn't the original developer by the time we purchased it, was charging at a much higher rate than we expected, and it was pricing out graduate students. And so by buying it, we were able to subsidize it at a higher rate and house graduate students. Original intent, but I would really counter your argument, Councilman. That hasn't, any new beds in the city has an impact on the housing supply overall. Because those people were competing against your constituents and others for housing throughout the city. But, you know, in terms of we bought that very specifically in an LLC, it's owned by a commercial entity, owned by Brown. To be very clear that we're going to adhere to, we didn't have to, but we want to adhere to that tax stabilization agreement through its entirety. And what happens a decade from now, at the end of that, I think I don't have to answer that right now. But we're certainly fully committed to that being, fulfilling that agreement, which was not required.
which is fair. And I appreciate Brown doing that to increase affordability. I just, the Superman building's a perfect example where there was a provision that was introduced in that ordinance that prevented an institutional partner from taking more than 91 of the units, so that it could increase or enhance affordability or housing all across the city. I wonder if that's something that the administration and the institution could potentially entertain. I think that would be an easy one, just, not.
If I may, I want to jump in.
Yes, sorry, but
We're not
just wanna
here,
throw that out
in
there.
my opinion, as the chair, we're not here to negotiate a deal that's already been negotiated. And we all have, there's 15 council people here that have 15 different opinions, and we can just all 19, well, not 15 people. But we can all keep throwing ideas on something that is, like I said, we have no say. There, 20 years ago, pretend, like I sit here and listen to everybody talk, and I think 20 years ago, what the council was listening to, probably the same questions. And, about having the leverage and everything. I mean, I'm happy that the administration and the institutions came together. They didn't have to, especially after just what happened with the administration taxing the commercial. They could have said, you know what, we're going to do that, forget it, we're not even going to sit at the table. Now we're paying more money for the commercial and you want more money. So I don't think it's fair to the administration and the institutions for us to shoot from where we sit. That's what I'm trying to say. And as far as, and like I said, they were fair to come to us and offer what they can, and they actually went to the table. I know the president asked for the increase, which wasn't on that, the increase of the yearly cost of living, yes. And they did do that, so that was something that was not in the original agreement that's in. But for us to keep just throwing stuff at them, because at the end of this meeting, we need to obviously continue it and set up a public hearing. And at that point in time, we can hear what the people have to say. And then we gotta have another meeting after that. But I mean, I want to say thank you to the institutions for coming here for the nights and listen to all of us, because I know it's not easy. And like I said, 20 years ago, I mean, they met their payments. reason why we shouldn't think that they're not gonna meet their payments. And it's voluntary, so, you know, we're split hairs about MLU, and they paid the payments before, they're paying more payments now. Whether you have an opinion, whether they should pay more or whatever, but things have changed. Look, we found out through other issues with the 8 Club, there's loopholes. You know what I mean? So this probably isn't as solid as what we think it is either, you know? So as well as Boston. I can't compare us to Boston when I don't have Boston's information to look at. Because we could probably look at theirs and say, well, geez, how come they're not doing this, how come they're not doing that? So I'm rambling, I know, but I just want to thank the institutions and administration for coming together. And I'm going to pass it off to Councilman Machado. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, in essence, that was to have we as a city independently reviewed the value benefit that the current agreement has used and evaluated. And is
So I think this meeting is that, because that's why we're here, to vote on, to listen to the institutions and administration on the deal that they gave us. If it wasn't a deal that they were not in agreement with, they wouldn't have brought it.
right, not on this one, but just the previous one, the previous, yeah. The one that's, it's already expired, 20 years, and then has there been an independent or a review of these past 20 years?
So that agreement provided $90-something million. That agreement provided just over $90 million. It didn't have any provisions for community contributions in the way this one does.
Right.
So it's just the value of the payment.
Just the value of that. So therefore, that
It's 94.
doesn't have nothing to review, it's just the fact that we manage that money.
Exactly.
So going forward, would this, under this agreement or even within the administration, looking forward to 19 years from now, this is gonna come up, whether that's the new mayor or so forth, can there be some type of language or amendment that it has to come before the city council? Versus what we heard, the reality is that we were, this administration, and the Brett's administration, your leadership and so forth, said, hey, let's work with the city council. Let's bring it forward because that's the right thing to do. Who knows, 19 years from now, is there something that can be, besides putting a resolution? And if we do put a resolution, does it violate, this understanding? And that's my question. That's my one. Thank you for the presentation. And I think that my colleagues raised a lot of questions that, and clarify a lot of things for me, but I think even for our constituents. And like our chairman said, in many issues here, understanding that we are the legislative body of the city, that some things are limited for us to do, but also it gives us the opportunity to just sound out and put it on the record and let our constituents know that we're also advocating for more inclusion from the legislative body in the city of Providence. Thank you.
So what requires council approval and not is provided for in the charter. So between now and when this would come up in 20 years, there'll be opportunities to amend the charter as every 10 years of the charter review. So that would be the opportunity. And putting something like that within an agreement would be meaningless, wouldn't be helpful. So that's something we need to amend the charter.
I understand about the charter, but about these type of, this agreement right now. So you're saying, no, it cannot.
I'm saying that what requires council is established in the charter. So I think if I understand council directly with these things, we want in the future it not to be voluntary, not as the administration's current.
Sure.
That would be 9 years.
No, not necessarily. You can make charter. So you can make charter changes anyway. If it's just in 10 years, that's when everybody goes through the charter and tries to make the changes.
But I wouldn't complain that it didn't want us.
Councilor Sanchez?
Thank you, and I really want to thank everyone for the time. This is a good, healthy discussion, lots of questions and comments on council for asking as well, a lot of questions. My last question just is going backwards. I think a couple of folks have asked about, I think, what consider regarding the first point in the community benefits. Is there a reason that's in there? Is there any opportunity to remove this if it's not really relevant at this point?
So I think Councilman Taylor raised an important point that like, this is an agreement that's being brought forward for approval, and I don't think we've contemplated changes to the agreement, so that's something we'll have to discuss as a team. I think the reason it's important to have that in there is it speaks to incentives, right? And so I think it is good to put an incentive in the agreement that says to institutions that if they put properties on the commercial tax roll, they get credit for it. And remember, it doesn't like reduce their payment to us. So in some ways, if an institution was contemplating, you know, should I make this property available for commercial use, which would require me to pay commercial tax, an incentive to that is that they get to count it in their community benefit contribution and still pay the same amount of money to the city. So to me, it, you know, was an incentive that was set up in the MOA just for Brown. This kind of carries it into the MOU to ensure that we're providing that incentive for all the institutions.
It's basically an added benefit.
That's right. I mean, what is most important about community contributions, I've seen this reported in the, you know, I don't know what we call it now, the experts. Like, the community contributions do not reduce the payments, which is different from the Boston model and other places, which is why it's confusing. But it doesn't mean that they pay us less. It's just an accounting of how they're trying to benefit the city. And I think it does benefit the city to have them make properties available for commercial use and to pay the commercial taxes on them.
Final question from Councilwoman Anybody else have something to say?
Yeah.
Can I ask one?
You said that in the last one. That's okay. After her.
Also, I just want to echo the gratitude that you guys are here till almost 8. I know many of you have kids and you guys home, and thank you for being here with us and for all your work. Appreciate it. I guess I have one final maybe question comment. I'm really excited that we are having a public hearing that will be advertised for transparency for our constituents and all the things. I just think that's a really good process. And also, I wonder if what I'm hearing is that there are no changes contemplated or the ability to make changes to this MOU. We should end that MOA. We should be really clear at the beginning of that public hearing because people, a lot of our residents put a lot of time and energy, like you are tonight, to come to the community. It's very demoralizing to find out that there was no impact of that, like okay, you were heard and then there's no impact, and that was baked into the process from the beginning. So if we are going to have a public hearing, we should be upfront about what the possibility are from that, and if there is a possibility that there are changes, I think people have thoughts and they'd like to share them. If it's an exercise in just hearing, you know, we can find out that with surveys and things like that, and look at that without people having to come and spend meetings and finding this person. So just wanted to say that out loud.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I really appreciate that. And just want to affirm that. I totally agree. Quickly, with regards to the community benefits, is there some things would be a slight change? It is pretty broad. Is there any possibility, especially for those of us who have these institutions that are to explicitly lay out that we as council people who are representing our constituents and close to our constituents on the ground to be able to be a part of that process when more specific decisions are being made. And that's just a quick line that says in consultation or partnership with the local elected officials in that area.
look at me.
Because this is an upright agreement that was negotiated across, like, I can't say yes to that because it's an agreement negotiated across the parties. And so I will consider that the list of things that has been recommended as we discuss the path forward across the administration. There are certainly things we can do in practice that maybe are. Thank you.
There's no further questions. I'd like to, because I gotta change my saying here. We have the big fish is brown, and then the littler fish is PC, Johnson, Wales, and Brisbane. I know you all showed up. Would you like to make any comments or anything? I don't want to slate you because you're a part of the process, and any comments you want to make, please come up. I don't want to just be talking to the big fish. I want the little fish to hear as well. It's only fair. I mean, you showed up, you've been here for God knows how long. And I'd like to hear from you. If you'd like to say anything, please come up. You're all set? Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to make a motion, I'd like to have a motion to, we're gonna set up a public hearing, which is gonna be, is it Tuesday, October 26th? September 26th. September 26th, Tuesday at 5:30, a public hearing. Instead of finance, it will be a public hearing. 5:30, Tuesday, September 26th. Yes. Can I have a motion for that? Second.
Motion to continue.
Do I need to do that first? Motion to continue.
Motion to continue.
All those in favor? Opposed? That passes. Now, for the public hearing, Tuesday, September 26th at 5:30 p.m. All those in favor? I'll put that advertised for now. It'll be September 26th at 5:30.
Advertise it coming out September 15th, East Friday.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Okay, thank you, everyone, for coming. And that's it.
Sorry.
No, I'm in everybody's way right now.